A very good morning. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to Mentored, a live workshop series presented by Dutch Uncles. Today we have with us our mentor, Mr. Hemendra Mathur, who is the co-founder of ThinkAl. He is currently the chairman of FICCI Task Force on agriculture startups and venture partner at Bharat Innovation Fund. With over 25 years of experience in venture capital, private equity, management, and consulting and investment banking, Mr. Mathur has invested in several early stage agritech and mid sized companies in the agriculture supply chain. He's also a board member and advisor in many food and agritech startups. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Kanan, and thanks to the Dutch Uncle team for this opportunity.
We are very glad to have you with us today. So, today the topic of our discussion is opportunities for agricultural startups. So, agritech startups. So, sir, I request you to kindly take over and initiate the workshop.
Thank you very much. And I'll request you if you can put the slideshow.
Sure.
Great. So, a very good morning to all of you. A pleasure and honor to be presenting on this platform on a very important topic and a topic which is very close to my heart on the opportunities for startups in agricultural space. Uh, what I want to cover as part of today's session is essentially, what is the current status of tech ecosystem in India, how it is evolving, and what are the various opportunities that are emerging for young startups. It's a very, very vast area. As we know, agriculture is one of the key pillars of Indian economy, contributing to almost 15 to 17% of the GDP, and almost 50% of a population continue to depend on the agricultural sector. And I think one of the key drivers for growth in agriculture, at least for next decade or two, will be innovations. And this innovation is going to be these innovations are going to be driven by young entrepreneurs who are joining this sector. There's a lot of momentum in last 3 to 5 years, and the kind of ecosystem which is developing is fascinating. And I'm often asked, is it too late to enter into the sector? The answer is no. You can still make it. It's not a winner take all market. So there'll be opportunities for everyone. Unlike a lot of other sectors where we see that it's becoming very, very competitive. So as I mentioned, today I'll be covering the current status of the ecosystem, what these agri-tech startups are trying to solve, right? I think that's the fundamental question. And what are the various opportunities? I have listed about 7 areas which I want to cover as part of this presentations. How you can benefit from the ecosystem, which is very, very mature, I must say. And I want to end with some of the learnings that I have had working directly with some of these agri-tech startups. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So if you look at the problem which tech startups are trying to solve, uh, they are across the value chain, right from pre-production to production to post-harvest. First and foremost, as we know that Indian farming is very fragmented. There are about 150 million farmers, and there are about approximately same number of farm holdings. If you look at the average farm holding in India is about 1.08 hectare. No? If you compare it with uh, farm holdings in the US or Europe or Brazil, they have much, much larger farms. So in that way, Indian agriculture is very unique, and any solution that you are developing need to be solving for small and marginal farmers, which constitute 85 to 90% of the whole farming community. So that's one big challenge where a lot of startups are trying to build interesting models. Then there are challenges which are rising out of climate risk. As we all know, the water table is going down. 80% of water in the country is used for agriculture purpose. And India continue to be one of the most water stressed countries in the world. So just imagine if we can save 10 to 15% water which is used for irrigation, what does it mean for the country as a whole, right? So there are many solutions which are trying to address water use efficiency and other climate related parameters. On the production side, one big challenge which we see in the supply chain, that the labor is becoming unavailable, and it is also becoming more expensive, right? So ultimately we need to move towards more mechanization solution. Unfortunately, in India, mechanization is synonymous with tractorization. We have too many tractors, but the level of mechanization is still very low, and that's where we need a lot of innovations on products and how these services are delivered to the farmers. On the post harvest side, challenges around storage, processing, transportation, logistics, cold chains, multiple challenges which causes significant amount of food loss, which makes the supply chain very inefficient. So I think that's these are some of the challenges where we see a lot of potential for new innovations. If you look at from a farmer perspective, farmer challenges access to market. One of the biggest challenges. Most of the farmers in India end up selling their produce at the nearest mandi or the nearest market yard, which is typically 30 to 50 kilometers from where from the farmer's field, and it's not necessary he gets the best price from that market yard. So can we help farmer discover more buyers? Can we help in price discovery? I think that's one of the fundamental needs of the farming community. Farmer is also looking for solutions around farm pickup, because the first mile and the last mile logistics still very challenging. Credit. 30% of India's farmer have access to institutional credit, and 70% still dependent on informal sources of credit, where the cost of credit is as high as 24% to 60% per annum. Just imagine, the cost of capital is so high, which makes the whole farm economics look very vulnerable. So, can we improve the access of institutional credit to the farmers? And that's where I see a very interesting intersection of agri-tech and fintech. I call it as agri-fintech. I think this is the next big opportunity in the sector. Can we make institutional credit available to majority of farmers? Can we make access to insurance to the farmers? Can we make digital payments a reality in the rural areas? So I think there's enough solutions which are waiting to happen, and again I would say the entrepreneurs have a huge role to play. On the demand side, if you look at from a farmer perspective, the challenges that the demand is invisible, supply chain are longer. He there's very little access to warehousing. Most of the warehouses built in the country are meant for traders and processors, not for smallholder farmers who has probably 1 ton, 2 ton, 5 ton of produce. But he doesn't find many warehouses where we can go and store his produce, because those are very large warehouses for him, right? And then of course access to inputs. The whole input supply chain needs transformation, be it seeds, be it fertilizer, agrochemicals, biostimulants, machinery. I think the conventional channels are there, but there are challenges out there. A lot of products sold are spurious. Many a time they're sold above MRP, and many products are adulterated. So we need to build direct to farm models for enabling access to good quality inputs. Like we are seeing direct to consumer models in the urban areas. Last but not the least, the challenge of data. I think data is one of the most scarce commodity in the whole agriculture value chain. The data is not available. Even if it is available, it is not accurate. And even if it is available, it is not available in a format which can be used for decision making. And that's where I see a huge application potential for data sciences. I think agriculture is one of the area which is heaven for data scientists. There's so many variables, and you can do so much with it, which can essentially help, in decision making for the farmers, as well as for other value chain members like agri input companies, food processing companies, banks, financial institution, etc. Um, can we go to the next slide, please? If you look at the evolution of agri-tech in India, it's almost a decade old. I would say the first few agritech startups started in 2011-12, but it started to pick up in 2017-18, and the fundamental reason for that is the entry of some very very high quality entrepreneurs. Many of them came from non-agricultural background, essentially bringing in the tech expertise, which is so important to make the whole supply chain tech-enabled, demand-driven, and efficient. I think that's really, was the inflection point, I would say, in the whole agri-tech ecosystem, where we saw hundreds of entrepreneurs entering the ecosystem with very, very strong tech backgrounds. So if you look at as of today, more than 1,000 plus agri-tech startups in the country. Good number, but still very small in the context of the opportunity. And my prediction is that this number should go to at least 10,000 startups in next 10 years. That's where the opportunity lies, right? If you look at the investments, most of the investors, essentially the venture capitalist or the private equity investors, they saw more risk than reward in this sector for a long, long time. But if you look at last 3 to 4 years, that has also changed. Now investors see it is a very, very important sector. They see it as a very resilient sector, as demonstrated during COVID times, when all other sectors of the economy were degrowing. Agriculture demonstrated growth, right? So I think investors are becoming more and more amenable to invest in the sector. And as we speak, about more than $1 billion has been invested in the sector for last 8 to 10 years, and out of that, maximum amount has come in last 18 months. And I'm sure as we go along, this number is going to change. And again, my prediction is we're going to get at least $10 billion investment in next 10 years. Another challenge is farmer adoption. As per our research in ThinkAg, that the penetration of agri-tech innovations among farmers is about 10%. So approximately 14 million farmers have adopted some of the agri-tech solutions. And I guess this number can go to as much as 90%. And there are enough tailwinds. I think one of the biggest changes that we are seeing in rural areas is access to broadband, access to 4G networks, and then improving penetration of smartphones. I think that will change the access a lot. Though a lot of these models will continue to be combination of physical and digital, but I think digital access will improve exponentially in next 3 to 4 years, which will make many of these agri-tech models scale very fast than what we have seen in the in last few years. Another important dimension is that a lot of Indian startups are going global, right? And I'm very confident that we are going to have a huge opportunity for Indian startups to build solution for the world. And the reason I'm saying that, if you look at the smallholder farming population in the world, it is almost 500 million, right? And so about 2 billion people are dependent on smallholder farmers, huh? One almost one third, or let's say about 25% of the whole population. And if we are developing solution for smallholder farmers in India, which is about 125 million. So 25% of smallholder farmers in the world are in India. So solutions which are solving problems for Indian farmers, I'm sure they can solve problems for smallholder farmers, whether he's in Indonesia or whether he's in Africa or China or any other part of the world where smallholding farming is dominant. Another key driver for agri-tech is increasing interest and participation from Indian corporates, because a lot of the agri-tech solutions are not direct to farmer and they are dependent on intermediary, and many times the intermediary is a corporate. So corporate engagement is very, very key for scaling of these agri-tech solution. And we are seeing many corporates likes of Nestle, Marico, Mahindra, ITC, UPL, Mexico, Olam, Buhler, Godrej, Bayer, Syngenta, BSF, Rabobank, and I can go on and on. Most of them are engaging very actively. I think one of the things which they realize that the growth is not going to come out of innovations which are they developing in house. They have to embrace innovations from the ecosystem, and that's where we are seeing very, very interesting partnership between startups and the corporates in the agri sector, which is a very good sign. Last but not the least, the government policy reforms and government support. I think government is recognizing that agri-tech has a huge role to play, and they are coming up with a lot of interesting programs around incubation of startups, grant challenges with specific problem statements, and developing public ecosystem. Right, for example, the Agritech, which has been announced recently, is called IDEA, Indian Digital Ecosystem for Agriculture. I think that's a path-breaking policy initiative which can really disrupt Indian agriculture and provide opportunity for innovators. Right, Agri Infra Fund is another one which envisages creation of lot of physical infrastructure in the rural areas. So I think with that background, I will go to the opportunities what exist for entrepreneurs who are looking at this sector, and I'm assuming a lot of listeners for this workshop are aspiring entrepreneurs. So I have listed down, as I said, about seven odd opportunities. The first one is access to good quality inputs, and which essentially means enabling access of good quality inputs at the right time at the right price. Very interestingly, farmer is not looking for discounts, he's not looking for promotions, he's looking for good quality products, because the productivity and hence his income is dependent on what ultimately is going into the soil and the crop, and he's willing to pay a price for it. So we are seeing a lot of interesting models, and I've listed some of the names on the slides, like of AgroStar, Dehat, Big Heart, Gramophone, Unnati, Behtar Zindagi, Fresho Cards. They are building these models, which is helping farmers to get inputs efficiently. Typically, these models involve demand generation or demand aggregation, either through an app or through a call center model. And some of these startups also have an offline presence in the states they're present in. So first to aggregate demand, then it also has element of data and advisory, because you, how do you assess what farmer needs? You need to do crop diagnostics, you need to do soil diagnostics, you need to look at hyperlocal weather parameters, and then say, hey, you need this much of urea, you need this much of DAP, or you have to spray pesticides in so and so week. And that essentially means that this is a prescriptive selling. You need to get a lot of data from the farm and then customize what inputs farmer need to be using, right? So there's an element of data and advisory. In addition, there's an element of credit, because a lot of inputs in India are sold on credit. And the big challenge of last mile logistics, in urban India, we see delivery, we see Revigo, and we see Ecom Express. Unfortunately, in rural India, we don't have so many logistics partners. So I think a lot of these startups are trying to figure out how to deliver to farmer doorsteps, and I'm sure there are going to be very, very interesting logistics opportunity which may come up in rural areas, which can collect from farmers, which can deliver to farmers. So I think that's one large area. Our input market is almost $80 billion, and very small percentage of that is being catered by the startup, which is direct to farm model. So I think that's opportunity number one. Opportunity number two is in building farm to fork linkages, or post harvest management. What are the elements of these models? Essentially, these are demand driven supply chains. Again, you aggregate demand from the end consumer, which could be people like you and me. It could be mom and pop stores. It could be horeca segment. It could be institutional buyers. So you aggregate demand, be it fruits, be it for vegetables, be it for staples, be it for spices. And then you, once you aggregate the demand, then you build a tech enabled supply chain, build models for farm procurement. I call it these CCDC model, collection center for CC, which is essentially near the farm, and DC is distribution center, which is essentially near the consumption center. So a lot of startups in this area, very, very, very interesting startup like Dehat, like Ninja Cart, Way Cool, Kamatan, INI, Acrofarm, Agribolo, this Agrowave, this doing wonderful job. Some are focused on fruits and vegetables, some are focused on staples, some are focused on both. And now we are getting very, very specialized plays in market linkages, like startup focused on spices, startups focused on silk, startup focused on dry fruits. So there's huge opportunity. I think this is a low hanging fruit. There are about 7 to 11 intermediaries between farmer and the consumer. The whole idea is to disintermediate the supply chain, make it more efficient, make it more transparent, demand driven, and you can unlock a lot of value in that process. My only caution here to the startups: don't get into pure trading plays. I think trading plays are faster to scale, but you don't make margins, and that's where you need to build some value addition component, either through cold storage, either through dehydration, or some bit of primary processing like sorting, grading, packing, so that there are enough margins. rather than you becoming a pure trading play, which has very, very little and low entry barriers. The third opportunity, which as I mentioned earlier, also agri fintech, one of my favorites, and the solutions out there are again combination of physical and digital, which involves solutions around farmer onboarding, credit scoring, risk assessment, risk management, risk mitigation, risk monitoring, all the way to loan recovery. I think that's where the solution lies. Unfortunately, not many startups are able to provide the whole sort of bouquet of services, but I see a collaboration opportunities between startups, and with that they can form partnerships with banks. I can tell you very large banks, both public sector and private sector banks, are looking to partner with agri fintechs so that their transactional cost or cost of accessing farmers, cost of recovering farming loans can be reduced significantly. Typically, they invest 2,000 to 5,000 rupees for a crop loan of 30 to 40,000 rupees, which is very, very high, right? Can agri fintechs reduce that cost to something like 100 rupees, 500 rupees, so that it becomes effective, it becomes easy for these banks to lend to the farmers? And that's where we're going to see a lot of interesting innovations in time to come. The PSL lending in India is $200 billion. Just imagine, it's probably larger than the mortgage market, and if that can be disrupted using this solution, the it can create many unicorns, but more importantly it can improve the access of institutional credit, low cost credit to farmers. Again, I've listed some of the startups in this space like Samunati, Jai Kisan, Pharma, Bija, Karya. Some are on the pre-harvest side, some are on the post-harvest side. Some are also in the ancillary industries focused on dairy, aqua, fisheries. I think that's also very, very important value chain, and they are undergoing through a digitization process, which will make it amenable for digital lending. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. Uh, then opportunities in data and advisory. Again, I mentioned that data is a very scarce commodity, and we need to be solving for it. How this data is collected? It's through a combination of hardware and software. Hardware is typically your weather stations, drones, satellite imagery, IoT, sensors, spectrometers, mobile phones. So you collect data from a lot of these devices, but the secret sauce is not in the hardware. It is in the models that you build, which use a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So there's an element of data training. You collect a lot of data, you try and make sense out of it, and you then transmit this data to the farmers and other value chain players. And that's where I think there's an opportunity to for a lot of startups to build a global pay, not necessarily for India but for the global markets, because the lot of these data driven startups are geography agnostic. For example, crop signature of maize in Bihar will be same as the crop signature of maize even if it is grown in Brazil, right? So I think a lot of these data startups are geography agnostic, and where I see a opportunity to build a global play and a global SaaS play. I think global SaaS plan agriculture is a bound to happen, which which is a huge opportunity, and I'm sure some of these data startup will be able to crack it. And what we saw as a BPO opportunities in India in late 90s and since then in the IT sector, I think same opportunity exists for Indian Agritech to build these solutions which are low cost, affordable for rest of the world. Again, I've listed some of the startups in the space: Bharat Agri, Bharat Rohan, Cultivate, Set Sure, Cropin, TraceX, multiple interesting solutions across value chains. And I'm sure most of these can scale in India as well as globally. Next opportunity in mechanization, as I said, huge opportunity. And there's both product and service opportunity. Product is essentially, can we build tools and mechanical devices for the farmers which are affordable? I think that's one opportunity. I believe any mechanical tool which is less than $1,000 and which can pay back to the farmers in one or two crop cycles, that's a huge opportunity, right? So let's say solutions for sowing, solutions for land leveling, solutions for seed sowing, weed identification. can we build affordable low cost mechanical solution which can do multiple jobs and essentially can have a payback period of 1 or 2 crop cycles. So that's on the one hand. Another end is some high end robotics, computer vision. We are already seeing startups like X Machines, Tartan Sense, who are building these solutions. Globally, there's a company called Blue River Technology, which built this solution using computer vision, where you can detect the weed in the field, and it detects the weed and it sprays the weedicide. So there's no manual intervention. So can we create those kind of solutions in India? Drone applications for pesticide spray. I think that's again a $1 billion opportunity. And with regulations easing, I think we are going to see more and more drone applications in India for pesticide spray, for data collection, and other possible farm services. So I think this is also an interesting area. And then, of course, solutions around cooling, solutions around dehydration, huge opportunity in waiting, which need to be solved in the near future. Novel farming systems, it's a niche opportunity as of now. When I say novel farming systems, essentially means polyhouses, greenhouses, essentially agriculture under controlled conditions where you can control temperature, moisture, humidity, airflow. And then there are solutions which are upcoming like hydroponics, vertical farming, which essentially have productivity levels of like 10 to 100 times vis-a-vis conventional agriculture. Of course, it needs very sort of upfront investment. That's where I see that it may not be farmer driven solutions. A lot of entrepreneurs need to come up with the models where they can build this solution in a asset light manner, you know getting capital from partners in a franchisee mode, and building solutions, and also overlaying it with some interesting distribution model like D2C. I think that's what makes it very, very interesting. I think there's an opportunity to create Oyo in a in a novel farming innovation ecosystem where you can build multiple such farms without investing too much of capital, and getting local partners on board and building a distribution model for them. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so then I listed down some of the opportunities on the food tech side or the downstream side. I think that's also catching up fast. D2C is the flavor of the season. There's a report which says there's a D2C opportunity in India across categories $100 billion, and food and grocery is definitely one of them. We've already seen a lot of funding going into startups which are supplying meat and poultry products to the farm to the consumers, likes of Fresh to Home, Tender Cuts, and Licious. And I think many of them have raised a significant amount of capital. In fact, first unicorn in Agritech is likely to come from D2C space, that too in meat and poultry. So that, and now we are seeing many other startups like who have raised money in the recent past, like Frezzo, like uh, there are many others. I'm forgetting the names, but I think that D2C opportunity exists, and the reason for that is that essentially D2C in food and grocery essentially means controlling the supply chain. For example, if I supplying spinach to consumers, can I supply the same quality of spinach throughout the year? That's where the challenge is. So if you start controlling the supply chain, your ability to brand and build a D2C model goes up significantly, right? So I think that's very important opportunity. And related opportunity is on the branding of fruits and vegetable. We are already seeing likes of Adani, Farm Pick, Suri Agrofresh, Enjoy, Innoterra has launched Happy Bananas, and also launched Happy Cherries recently. So I think that's another opportunity in waiting, branding of fruits and vegetable and staples, which is largely commoditized market, right? Then I'm running short of time, so probably I'll rush. Opportunities around alternative proteins. Unlike the Western world, it's not going to be meat substitute model. Alternative proteins would mean alternative sources of protein which have potential to become mainstream protein. I think that's where the opportunity is. Or you become an outsourcing hub for meat substitutes for rest of the world. So if Impossible Burger costs $5, can India produce that at $1? So it's a global outsourcing opportunity. It's a from a global perspective, and a mainstream protein opportunity from an India perspective. Millet based foods, I think millet is one crop which I feel very strongly about. It lost to paddy and wheat in the green revolution, but I think it is making a comeback because of its high nutrition value. It has low glycemic index, very good for people with diabetes. It consumes very less water as compared to paddy and wheat, so very good from a climate resilience perspective. And that's where we are going to see a lot of innovative startups and solutions and models which are based on millets. And last but not the least, herbal and organic foods. I think organic foods has always been a sunrise industry. The reason it could not it couldn't take off is because it was always positioned as premium product. If we can make organic products more affordable, if we can create trust between the end consumer and the farmers or the producers of organic food, that's another important element, because a lot of products sold in India as organic are not organic, so that distrust has to be solved. And I think technology around traceability, food safety, has a huge role to play in creating that trust between the uh, farmer producers and the consumers. Next slide, please. So I'll probably rush last couple of slides. Ecosystem for agritechs changing for good. Whether it's startups, as I mentioned, very high quality startups. I'm so pleased to see the quality of entrepreneurs that are there in the ecosystem. Incubators have done a phenomenal job, like FICCI, Co, AID and NAM, Will Grow, Pusa Krishi, Venture Center, Indigram, ECRISET. There are some of them. There are like dozens of incubators supporting startups. You must connect with at least one of them if you want to get an incubation support. Acceleration programs from the government, from the corporates catching up. Corporate Connects, as I mentioned, is changing for good. At ThinkAg, also, we are driving a lot of corporate startup partnership, which is very encouraging. One area which I feel need to catch up is village ecosystem. None of the agri-tech models are going to scale without participation from village level entrepreneurs, without participation from FPOs and NGOs and local organizations. Because farmer is not going to trust a person who's coming from Bangalore, Delhi, or Mumbai. He's going to trust someone who is there in the rural area. So I think that is very important, uh, that we build the local ecosystem, create opportunity for rural entrepreneur also. I think rural entrepreneurship and agri-tech go hand in hand. That's the beauty of this model, that it's not just creating a few thousand jobs in urban areas, it's going to create millions of jobs, that too in rural areas. Digital platform, as I mentioned, government has announced it. I'm very hopeful that this will drive an array of innovations, an array of digital innovations, and will make farmer access challenges much more can be addressed at a less cost and much more efficiently if we have this public digital layer working. And of course, investors, as I mentioned, more and more investors are joining the bandwagon. A lot of generalist fund who have never invested in agri-tech are looking to invest in this sector. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, these are some of the logos of the key incubators, and I must confess that this is not an exhaustive list. So there are many more, but please feel free to reach out to one of them at least if you want to build an agri-tech solution and want the support in terms of mentoring and some sort of seed capital. Next slide. This is just a graphical representation of how investments are flowing. You can see how it has gone in the last. So this the data is till 2019. We're going to come up with a 2020 report very soon, but the curve is looking very steep, and I'm very sure that we're going to get some very good capital and good quality of investors into the sector in near to medium term. Next slide. Last slide from my side, and then we'll open it up for the questions. What are my learnings? So I, of course, work with a lot of Agritech startups in my personal capacity as mentor, advisor, investor, and board member. I think one thing which I really like about Agritech startups, and it's a learning for everyone who wants to be in this sector, that a lot of them have high degree of resilience, very frugal approach, don't burn crash in farmer acquisition, in customer acquisition, but create value. As I said, farmers are not looking for discount; they're looking for value. So, can you build a model which is on creating value, not necessarily burning cash to get more customers on board or more farmers on board? So I think that's one of the very unique elements of Indian agri-tech, and that's why the mortality rate of agri-tech startups is less than 15%. Many of them don't don't shut operation or survive. They survive because there is a high degree of resilience, and they can sort of at least grow linearly even if they don't get capital. So I think that's a very unique element of Indian agritech. Unit economics is extremely critical. It's critical for all the sectors, more so in agriculture, because the supply chain is long. So if I'm building a solution, it should be profitable to me, it should be profitable to the farmer, it should be profitable to someone who's lending to the farmer, it should be profitable to someone who's giving inputs to the farmer, and it should also be profitable to someone who's buying from the farmer, right? So the unit economics work at multiple levels that you should be conscious of. No obsession with fundraising. I think that's very important. I really worry about startups who spend 80% of their time fundraising and 20% of time building business. It should be other way around. You should be spending less than 20% of your time fundraising and 80% time on building business, product development, etc., hiring team. And if you chase customers, investors will follow, I can assure you. Team composition, extremely important. As I said, most of the startups come with a tech background. Many of them don't have knowledge of agriculture. I think that's where we need to build bridges. How do we uh, get talent which understands agriculture, and which understand data science, which understand technology? It's a multidimensional problem, right? Agriculture in India is a multidimensional problem, so you need multidisciplinary approach. You need someone who understand behavioral sciences, someone who understand hydrology, someone who understand meteorology, someone who understands data science, agronomy, dairy. So there's so much. So that's where you need to build teams which are more holistic and brings multiple skill sets together, which can drive the solution, right? uh, and also you should go for a good mentor, good investor. You should take your time selecting that can be very helpful. Last but not the least, you should be obsessed with what are the problems that farmers are facing. You need to have a farmer centric approach. Unless you're solving for him, you will never be able to create a scalable solution, right? To me a unicorn in agriculture means someone who's created wealth of $1 billion for the ecosystem, not necessarily for his own shareholders, which means creating wealth for the farmers, for the local entrepreneur, for the entire value chain, rather than creating wealth for yourself. And that's why I always say there are already multiple unicorns in the sector, because they have created wealth for everyone, not just for themselves. So with that note, I'll stop here, and I'll request audience, if they have any questions, if Kanan can moderate that, that'll be wonderful.
So, first of all, thank you so much, sir, for such an insightful session. And we have viewers from all the platforms from Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And we have received some questions. So, let us start with the questions. Here is our first question. Uh, yeah. In novel farming, as you said, we need upfront investment. Any advice on what all should we make sure to convey in pitching the product or startup?
Yeah, I think typically you need an upfront investment of, let's say, 50 lakhs to a crore per hectare of land. If you're setting up a poly house or a greenhouse or a hydroponic solution or a vertical farming solution, I think as a startup, it's always challenging. If you go to an investor and say, I need 100 crores to run 100 farms, he'll say demonstrate at least 5, 10, or 15. So, you need some bit of demonstration. When I said you can make it asset light, it means can you find local partners who can invest? There are a lot of HNIs, for example, in India who are invested in agricultural land, but they don't know what to do about it. Can you at least go and talk to them, get land on lease, and they can be also investing. They can invest with you, and you can have a revenue share or a profit share model with them. And that's where what I call it OOization of agriculture in India, where you get multiple partners, whatever you want to call it, a franchise partner or a partner from the local ecosystem. And that's where it becomes asset light. That's where your ability to scale becomes very high. And that's what investors like. Can you go from 10 farms to 1,000 farms? Unfortunately, because everyone is investing their own money, most of these solutions still have 5 farms, 10 farms, 15 farms, at max 30 farms, 40 farms. So my advice to you, if you can think how efficiently you can utilize use of capital, how can you make it asset light, through a partnership approach that will be very very helpful while you are pitching to the investors.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is towards get winning customers. So we have a challenge of consumers not very familiar with tech. What are ways to win customers' trust for our products?
Look, essentially it's all about the right disclosures, so for example, a lot of these food brands are now coming with a QR code. Once you scan it, you can find what is there in the food, what is the nutritional profile, where it is coming from, when which farmer has grown it, where it was stored, how long it took for the product to travel from farm to the consumer end. So I think it's all about disclosures and living up to a promise. That's what ultimately create trust. Of course, there's a cost to it, but I can tell you more and more consumers are willing to pay that premium if the product is trustworthy, right? I talked about some of these brands in the fruits and vegetable which have come up, like Happy Bananas or Farm Pick from Adani or Enjoy from Suri Agrofresh. I think they all are able to brand it because there's an element of trust that if you buy from us, it's going to be, we are selling what we are promising, right? And that's where you need to control a significant part of supply chain. I'm repeating it again. If you have to create the trust, you need to control a significant part of supply chain and use tech to, so that any consumer, if he wants to audit whether your claims are correct, it's doable.
Right. Thank you, sir. The next question is from our LinkedIn viewer. How do you encourage the youth to see a future in agriculture when a general notion seems to attribute it as a traditional sector?
Very good question, huh? And I am putting my neck on the block, but I can tell you, farming is going to become more and more attractive. People will laugh at me if I say that we are going to see reverse migration in 10 years, but that's the truth. People like you and me who are fed up from city life will migrate to villages, will run farms, will produce and will sell. And the reason I'm saying it, because technology will help it. you know Probably we don't like traditional agriculture the way it is done, but there are so many tools now available where you can go manage very very efficiently, and it is very remunerative. All said and done, agriculture, unlike the notion that we have, the gross margins at the production end are very good. You If you at the cost of inputs, labor and everything, you can still make 30, 40, 50% margin. Unfortunately, those margins are eaten up by the interest cost, by the food losses, or by the price shocks that you see. So I think the technology is solving for it, right? So I am very very bullish that agriculture is the future, not just for rural India but for urban India. And Agritech Startups is a good example. People with urban background, with urban thinking, have ventured into rural areas, which demonstrate there's a role for youth, not necessarily rural youth. Of course, that's very important, and they will be the biggest beneficiary, but also for urban youth to look it as a potential opportunity to create value. And I can tell you, it is going to be very very satisfying career for people like you.
Right, thank you. That sounds very promising. So, moving on to our next question. Where do you position agri-tech at par with other sectors like fintech, edtech, etc., which invite a lot of profitable investments?
Very difficult to compare with other sectors. Of course, everything is important. EdTech, FinTech. I think they've done a startups in those ecosystems done have phenomenal job in scaling the models, and kudos to them. We are going to see billion-dollar IPOs very soon, and the kind of capital which is flowing into India is mind blowing. And that couldn't have happened without the energy of entrepreneurs. And so I think I won't say put one sector above another sector, but all I can say, agri tech is critical for the reason that I mentioned, that it is a significant part of the economy and it is lagging behind other sectors when it comes to adoption of technology. So that catch up has to happen. And my guess is that it's already happening. Next 10 years, you will see that agriculture will catch up with rest of the sectors on digital adoption. It will be almost at par, right? Second, the farm economics have to improve. How can that Bharat India divide? I think that needs to be bridged. Look, people in rural areas have similar aspirations, right, as we have. And if we can improve farm economics, and there's a huge potential. A farmer earns like $2,000 a year. Just imagine, with the potential is $5,000, $10,000. Can we create wealth for our farmers? I think typically farmers are seen as producers who's producing crops, selling commodities. What I want to see farmer as brand owners, farmer who can distribute products, farmers who can own companies, farmer owned companies. I think that's where we need to move. We need to create wealth for farmers. How many farmers can retire at the age of 50 with a 10 lakh bank balance? Hardly any, because they don't have savings. So unless farmer become an integral part of the value chain and become participant in the value chain, particularly on the value addition side, that's where the value gets unlocked. And that's, I think, the fair balance of share of value between someone who's doing an entrepreneurial model and the farmer who's at the core of the model, right? So I think that's where the opportunity is. So, of course, all sectors are important. All I want to say that the room for innovation in agriculture is still a lot, and it's not a winner take all market. I keep on repeating it. There won't be any Amazon, there won't be any Netflix, there won't be any Baiju, there won't be any Paytm in Agritech. There'll be multiple winners, maybe dozens. So it's not that, if so and so has raised $100 million round, what I'm going to do. You can go to five villages in Bihar and still make a $20 million brand, or you can go to five districts in Punjab and create $100 billion brand, right? That's the opportunity. That's the beauty of this sector, that you need not be pan India, and you can still create scalable models.
Thank you, sir. We will have a last question as per our time. So the question is, on what factors do you assess an agritech startup for deciding to invest in?
Good question. I think first and foremost, you know, of course, from an investor perspective, the solution has to be scalable, right? And whether we like it or not, technology has a role to play. And when I say technology, it doesn't mean just digital technology. It can be biotech, it could be food tech, it could be some other tech. But I think tech has to be integral. It need not be proprietary or patented tech, but there has to be some tech which can make it scalable. So that's first and foremost. What is that differentiator in the business which can make it scale? And answer typically is in the use of tech. How do you deploy tech? I'm not saying over invest in tech, but you should be clear how tech will drive scale. Second, of course, composition of team. As I mentioned, there are some very good entrepreneurs, but you need multiple skill sets. So, do you have those skill sets in the team, or do you have the ability to hire those skill sets? The biggest challenge for the sector today is not capital; it is talent. Can you get good talent into your team? And that's where, startup which have scaled and startup which struggle to scale, the difference is talent. So I think that is another important element. And third, as I said, unit economics. It's a very sort of, I'm using it again, but it's so important. You need to demonstrate unit economics. Everyone in the supply chain has to make profit, not just you, not just the farmer, not the value chain members, the vendors, the customer, and all the way to consumer. That's why the supply chain is, since it is elongated and complicated, the unit economics at multiple levels becomes a bit of challenge. But again, with use of tech, I'm sure that can be solved, and that's where we'll see models scaling faster. Last but not the least, I would, and it's a very personal view, I also want to see a gross margin strategy. Of course, EBITDA can be negative, your PAT will be negative to begin with, but at least a gross margin have to be positive, right? So build a strategy where you can build healthy double digit gross margins. I think you need to have that clarity. That's where I see lack of articulation or lack of strategy in the ecosystem even now. Most startups have figured out how to scale, but how to build a profitable business is still a question mark. And that's where I think you need to put your thinking hat, you need to figure out how do you unlock value so that it becomes a sustainable and profitable venture.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. That has been very insightful. And I'm definitely sure there are many takeaways, many learning points for all our viewers. So, any closing statements?
No, that's just want to thank you and the Dutch Uncle team for this wonderful opportunity. And anyone who wants to reach out to me can reach out through LinkedIn or any of the social media. All I want to end is on an optimistic note that the next decade is decade for agriculture. It's going to be disruptive. Whether it is I encourage all the listeners to look at Agritech as a serious opportunity for their careers. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. So, with this note, we would like to take the end. We would like to end this show, and we thank to all the viewers who have joined us, and thank you for all the questions. We hope that you must have received a lot of practical takeaways. You can also view the previous workshops on our YouTube channel. And with that, we would like to say thank you, and we will see you next in the next show with another mentor and another workshop. Thank you very much.